through economic. Oh, yes. We are recording this session, and so we encourage you, if you're uncomfortable with that, then you'll have to decline, and we do want this to be recorded for others. Okay. So yes, the final one is to encourage the government of Canada to support measures that put pressure on Israel, including through economic sanctions, to end the occupation and work for a just peace in accordance with international law. So that resolution is our mandate as the MC Canada PIN, and we are so grateful for the support of our denominational staff at Mennonite Church Canada and in the area churches in carrying out our mandate. And okay, I'm losing my place here. We'll get to that in a moment about our specific work, but we thought, first of all, it would be good for us to get a little bit of historical context and background. And so at this time, I want to turn the mic over to Kathy Bergen, who is chair of our working group in MCEC, and she's spent her working career in Palestine-Israel concerns. And so, Kathy, welcome, and you can take it from here for a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. I just found out that 2 people are in the waiting room, it says, but I don't see them on my screen. Can someone let them in? It's Al Rempel and Ken Bechtel. Let's see. Where are they? Oh.
I am not able to let them in either.
Oh, okay. Ken Bechtel is in. Now, Al Rempel. Where is Al Rempel? I don't see him anywhere on my screen. Oh, and there's more people entering. Lois Funk and Jake Dick, but I don't see them anywhere. Just a minute now. How? Suzanne, do you have them on your screen?
Yeah, I'm letting them in.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, Kathy, why don't you just go ahead and Suzanne, you'll admit others as they come in? Okay.
Okay, thanks, Byron. Yeah, as Byron was saying, I'm just going to give a very short overview of MCC. And I know we're talking about Palestine, and we're Israel-Palestine, and we are in a Canadian Mennonite Church context. But the Mennonites, which of course Mennonite Church Canada is part of MCC, has been working in Palestine, not in Israel, but in Palestine since 1949. I was there, and what I'd like to do is just say a little bit about how the work of MCC, which of course, like I say, Mennonite Church Canada was part of, how that has gone in the years since then. Just give a very, very brief overview. MCC started by working with Palestinian refugees. MCC was not allowed to work in Israel at the time. Israel forbade that, but worked with Palestinian refugees both in Gaza and predominantly in Jericho. After some years, MCC went from working with Palestinian refugees in a very in a context that was very, very difficult for people. They were living in tents. MCC was providing some food for them and just helping them to just be there, stay alive. MCC got into working on what was called economic development and agricultural development. And that took place for several years. After some years of that, MCC got more into what we call advocacy today. And in 1980, MCC brought the first person over who did peace work. And that was Harry Huebner, who many of you will know. Harry was teaching at the CNBC at the time. And he and Agnes came over and spent 2 years there. It was during that time that I was in Jerusalem with the AMBS, the Mennonite Seminary, on a study tour. And I actually was encouraged to apply for Harry's position, which I did. And I actually had my interview in Jerusalem, which is quite unusual. Paul Myers at the time came to Jerusalem, and I interviewed with him. So I was then brought in to replace Harry. Of course, I did that work very differently than Harry did, but it was more advocacy. I was responsible for representing Mennonite Central Committee in various places like Muslim, Christian, Jewish dialogue, and so on. I taught at the Bethlehem Bible College and at the extension in Gaza. I also was responsible for keeping in contact with Israeli peace groups, which were mushrooming at the time because of the very unfortunate happenings in Lebanon. Israel had just invaded Lebanon, and there were many Israeli groups who were against that. So mushroomed. The groups mushroomed, and I got to know all of them and worked with them over the course of the year. I also was responsible for educating internationals who came there, which also got to be Israelis who wanted to go on settlement tours. I would get Israelis referred to me quite often. So that was sort of the beginning of Harry and myself were the beginning of what they called advocacy work. So when we came back to North America, I remember when I had home leave, I would tour around. I would go to Bethel College, to AMBS and CNBC and so on. So that then since then, Mennonite Central Committee has had someone there in the advocacy position. Today, MCC is working very differently. MCC has, instead of doing agricultural and economic development, MCC is working or supporting Israeli and Palestinian groups who are working for peace with justice. And these would be groups like Zochrot in Tel Aviv, groups, it's a Hebrew name that means remember. Or remembering, a group that tries to get Jewish Israelis to be conscious of the Nakba and learn about Palestinian history. Groups like the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions and many others, and then also several Palestinian organizations like the Committee Against the Wall and We Am, which is a group in Bethlehem and working for a sulha, which means reconciliation in Arabic, community reconciliation in this case. So it has come a very on a path that is very different from what it started out to be, and I think it's very appropriate that MCC is working through Israeli and Palestinian organizations and supporting their work today. Okay.
Okay.
Should we have questions now, or should we leave those to later?
I think we'll leave them for us later, if that's okay, Kathy. Kathy's given us a great survey of the work of Mennonites, and particularly Mennonite Central Committee in Palestine and Israel. At this point, before we go on, I'd like to just draw your attention to the chat, where there is a link to our resolution, which is the heart of what we do. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Esther Kern, who's in the room with me here. Esther is a long-standing veteran of the work of community peacemaker teams and has served in Israel, Palestine as well. So she's listening in and may just pitch in when it comes to the discussion time. Has a lot of good experience there as well. And thanks to her for letting us use her room as one of the venues here. Okay, so let's move on here. Suzanne, if you want to just pick it up from what Kathy was saying, you were there very recently, and if you want to just talk about some of your experience, and then we'll move on to Shadia's story as well as a Palestinian. So Suzanne, take it away.
Hey, it's good to be with you all. I'm kind of, Katie is helping to host all this, and I am trying to take down names, and there are a couple unknowns. If you could put your name in the chat, that would be really helpful. There's 3 people that are named unknown on my desk. But anyway, if you could do that, that would be great, that we can have a record of who's here. Great, thank you. All right, so I was invited to share some stories today for a little bit. I think Shadia should be telling most of the stories, but partly because I was there in May. I visited Palestine in May. And so I'm gonna back up just a little bit. This was my 2nd time there. I took an MCC learning tour again in May 2018, and was part of the Christ at the Checkpoint conference hosted by Bethlehem Bible College, and then a shortened tour with MCC, which meant that I hadn't quite seen everything that some tour participants see. And so this year I had a chance to go back, and I'll tell you that story after I tell you a little bit about just 5 little points of things that I kind of remember very clearly about my time in the West Bank mostly. So I remember going through a checkpoint, and I remember feeling a little bit frightened. I was with a group, so I didn't feel unsafe, but there was a feeling it was an unsettling feeling. It was humiliating. I remember the clanging turnstiles. I remember the gruff guards, the pulling people aside, the rejecting people from going to the other side to work for the day, to feed their families for that day, is how it was explained to me, that these are the jobs that help. And so I experienced that as that's as close as I could get to seeing how the checkpoint system impacts families. That was where I learned about the different areas in the occupied territories, areas A, B, and C. I didn't know that before. All of this came after the Oslo Accords. Area A is the, am I talking too loud?
No.
Okay.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry, there was some background here.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
So Area A are the areas in the West Bank that are under Palestinian Authority and under Palestinian policing. Area B is Palestinian Authority with Israeli policing. Those are the areas surrounding Area A. And then Area C is agricultural land, which is completely under the military authority. That was a very important thing to understand, because then I visited a village in Area C and heard about the building permit issues. No building permits are given to villages in Area C, and so they can't build to accommodate their growing population. So then they build anyway, and then things get demolished, and we know that story all too well. And I heard firsthand about night raids and the heartbreaking stories of children being taken away with no information as to where or why. And I also saw the settlement right across the way with the Israeli-only road that divides their land, so the Palestinian land, so that shepherds can't take their sheep easily into their own grazing land because the road cuts them off. I also experienced the calm and harmony of Bethlehem, an example of Christian-Muslim community that works out how to live together. And yet there's that ugliness of the separation wall. And on that tour, I also visited South Hebron Hills and saw villages with settlements deep inside the so-called Green Line. So not right along the edges. Illegal settlements built right up against these villages, in your face, so to speak. And so here we are, 2022. I had an opportunity to go back. My husband grew up, his father was Jewish, so he grew up in a Jewish cultural environment and reclaimed his Judaism recently, converting to Judaism because his mother isn't Jewish. And as part of his work as a Jew now, he would like to do his part to bring some awareness and hopefully some good solutions to this problem in Israel, Palestine. And so he served for 3 months in South Hebron Hills with an organization called Center for Jewish Nonviolence. He was one of 7 volunteers who dedicated 3 months of living in South Hebron Hills in 3 villages to accompany shepherds and to accompany school children and to document incidents. And so at the end of that, I joined him for his last 3 days, and then we traveled a little bit. And so I'd like to share 3 stories from my experience recently. The way it worked is people had their assigned tasks of either supporting shepherds to make sure that settlers wouldn't attack them or harm their sheep, or help them face military inquiries, that sort of thing. And then the children going to school from Tuba, a village inside Masa Freyata, trying to get to the school in Tuwani, which was a bigger town that had a school. And anyway, while I was there, we got a call, and it was from farmers from this village called Tuba. And they said, we harvested our hay this morning and we're letting it dry, and the settlers stole it. And we would like to go back and get what's left, but we are afraid. Can you show up? So we all got in our cars and we drove to watch the farmers pull in, collect all the hay that was left. And thankfully, nothing happened. But we saw the settlement right there. And at one point, a family came out. They had a child in tow. And so we were pretty sure nothing violent would happen that day. That was as close as I got. But I'm sharing that story because it's linked to my 3rd story. So remember Tuba, because Tuba will feature into my 3rd story. My 2nd story starts with a text I got from my husband, who texted me, and I got it the next morning, and he said, "You'll never believe this. Today, we saw some stuff going on in Yatta. Yatta is the town where we do our shopping. It's Area A. It's under Palestinian Authority, Palestinian policing, and they have a swimming pool. And today, army jeeps pulled up, chased the Palestinians out of their swimming pool, and then 2 busloads of settlers came to swim in the swimming pool." And I thought, what in the world? Are you sharing a bad dream? Like, it just didn't make any sense to me. And then on our trip, we visited a long time Jewish activist, a good friend of Kathy Bergen's, Amos Gvirtz, and we started telling him this story, and we couldn't finish it. He said, and then they got it, and then the settlers came and swam in that pool, right? Yeah, that happens every couple of years. And so this is for me just so symptomatic of apartheid and occupation all wrapped up in one. On our last day with these volunteers, we got the terrible news that the Supreme Court of Israel had made a decision that had been lingering for over 20 years. I think it started in the late 80s, when Israel wanted to declare an area in the South Hebron Hills called Masa Freyata a firing zone, and the international community pushed back. So that was in limbo for decades, and they finally made their decision. On the eve of the Israel National Independence Day celebration, so nobody would notice. It was in the middle of Roe versus Wade. And they green-lighted the military to begin demolitions of villages, the 12 villages in this area of agricultural land, which would in effect displace upwards of 1,500 Palestinians, the most since 1967. So that was a devastating news. And Tuba is one of these villages. So the children that they got to know, the families that they got to, those farmers that I witnessed, are all now at risk of being displaced. And where will they go? They'll go to Yatta, maybe. Like, what's the plan? So we were all blessed by visits with committed activists for human rights. That's the other part, that once we started traveling, we visited Jeff Halper and his tireless showcasing of the home demolition strategy for disempowerment. We visited Omar from Sabil. We visited Rabbi Or in the Galilee, who works for peace through interfaith trust building. And we visited Amos Kvirtz, another tireless Jewish human rights advocate committed to pacifism, shaped by Mennonites and Quakers and others. All committed to abolishing the occupation and the existing apartheid elements, so palpable in this society, and all with different perspectives on how to accomplish this. It helped me understand my role a bit better to always start with the on-the-ground voices as I interact with this story. And so with that, we're so pleased to have with us today Shadia Kupti, who comes from Nazareth, which is in the Galilee, and who will share stories from on the ground as a Palestinian immersed in this story. So I'll pass it over to Shadia.
Thank you, Suzanne. I just want to apologize if my voice sounds a bit congested. I'm having some kind of cold. I'm not sure. So I'll try to speak as clearly as possible. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy that people outside of Palestine are talking about Israel and Palestine in a way where you're really trying to grapple with what does it mean? How to discern a just peace for Israel and Palestine? I mean, just as a Palestinian, you know, I've been here in Vancouver for 2 years. There's a sense of alienation in the terms of Israel. Palestine is not on the agenda very, very often. Even as I'm going, even in the seminary, it's not on the agenda. And so to hear that you are talking about it, you're trying to figure out what's happening. To me, as a Palestinian who's worked in peacekeeping, especially in the context of the church, it's encouraging. This is really a source of hope for me. So I appreciate that. I know that it's appreciated. So I grew up in Nazareth. I am part of what Ilan Pape calls the Forgotten Palestinians. You know, as a people, we are fragmented. And so we are the Palestinians who didn't necessarily leave when Israel was established in 67. Sorry, in 48, but in 67, we got citizenship. So I'm Palestinian with Israeli citizenship, whatever that means. Or called internally displaced or present absentees, all these terms, kind of ways that the government maintained control over the Palestinians that were still in Israel, but they're not full equal citizens to Israeli Jews. And that's just been the case again and again and over and over. You know, I grew up in the church. For me, choosing to work in peacemaking has really come from my own discernment that my faith is part of the solution to this conflict. And working in a faith-based reconciliation in Jerusalem called Musalah. Some of you are familiar with this organization. So we try to talk in the context of the church. What does it mean to follow the model of Christ? And of course, when you engage in that type of theology, you also hear counter theologies, different interpretations that actually don't see a peaceful solution to the conflict. Up to a certain point, there was a lot of dialogue, hopeful dialogue for change. But for me, I think after the 2014 war on Gaza, I started going through some kind of internal change, because there was not only the conflict was becoming more and more violent, but the dialogue turned into hostile, tit for tat, slander, it became quite unchristian, if we want to use these words. It was actually much more easier to talk to human rights organizations about Palestinian rights than to talk to fellow Christians who didn't adhere to the same interpretation. Because for me and for many Palestinians, if your theology is harming your brother, then there's something wrong with your theology and you need to reconsider that. And we've, my mom is very involved with Sabil. I've been involved with them. I moved to Jerusalem. I am kind of you can say, influenced a lot by Christ at the Checkpoint and Bethlehem Bible College. I got to work in World Vision for a bit, and World Vision had its own issues with the Israeli government in regards to their work, simple development work. But that same strategy of trying to target any organizations that are working for Palestinian rights, to put them in this legal limbo, right? Limbo, just take you to court, drain you out, because time is for the advantage of the Israelis, not the Palestinians. But Palestinian Christians, I think, since the beginning, we've always called for speaking up non-violently, talking about our situation. And really, whether it's publications like the Kairos document, our Cry for Hope, whether it's them taking part in demonstrations and even collaborating with you here, for example, all of that has come to say that we need to speak up. And I always say, growing up in Nazareth, my survival as a Palestinian Christian has had a lot to do with Christian presence here, right? I was educated in a private Christian school. I received healthcare from a private Christian hospital. Even I was paid through working with Christian organizations. And similar to my parents, my father was a teacher at a school, my mother was a social worker in a hospital. I would even say that our survival as Palestinian Christians is dependent on the Christian presence here, despite Israeli discrimination and occupation. And really, for me, the discerning point is always asking myself, is what I'm doing enabling the continuation of the imbalance of power? Or am I getting us close to the dream that Palestinian Christians see in the context? Peace is possible, and we believe in that. I want to leave you with a story. When I worked in reconciliation, when we bring Israelis and Palestinians together, there was one situation where someone from Bethlehem was talking about, especially, if you can imagine, if it's hot where you are, imagine this heat. Palestinians don't have running water every day, especially in the summer when they need it most. So this Palestinian was talking about the issue and how, they have to depend on the rain from the wells that collects rainwater and so on and so on. So this Israeli participant was moved, and he thought, he had a brilliant idea, and he came and said, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go to my youth group and we will pitch in and we'll buy 6 packs of water and distribute them to this Palestinian man and his family. And, I think maybe where he is, this was a great idea. But for me, I was always asking the question, well, why don't you help them address the issue of lack of access to water? Like, why don't you go to the top? Don't think just small for this specific person, but think about how come they don't have running water and what can we do about it? And so I think in a similar way that what you're trying to do here, and also what Palestinian Christians are saying, like, we don't only want waters of bottle. We want your help to address the systemic issues that are causing us lack of water, that are causing us to be treated unequally, that are getting us to that point. And I think theology has played a big role in that. And although we are unpacking it, we still have a lot of work to do. It's not easy. And even, me coming here to study indigenous theology, I think it's part of my own way of trying to discern, like, how do you move that needle of change? What can I learn from the context here to take it with me? Because I think for every Palestinian Christian, we struggle with hope. Where is our hope? How do we deal with the hopelessness of the situation? Because it's just a matter of time that then maybe it's my turn, it's my family's turn. And think about it in terms of, like, in the sense of to decolonize what it means to have a Christian hope. Because it's not just to be satisfied in the aftermath and the promise that we will have eternal peace, but it's also to think about what our role is today to bring that peace here to the now with what we have and our faith. You know, and again, I kind of am happy again. Thank you for allowing me to be here. And I think Tamer Nafar, who's a rap singer, he has a song. In one of his songs, he said, "Well, if Palestinians want to speak, set a timer because they're going to have a lot to say." So I think I'll stop here, and maybe in Q&A, if you want to ask me more questions, I'm happy to answer. But looking forward to hearing what others have to say as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shadia. You packed a lot into your presentation, and I'm glad you made the connection toward the end about settler colonialism. That's something you're looking at. That's a very harsh reality here in Canada that we're also trying to deal with. And in our PIN work, we do make those connections too. Situations are similar, different, but also similar in the sense that we're dealing with displacement of people from their land and colonization. So this human story that you've shared is really what drives this work. It's not only justice, it's not the only justice in cause in the world, of course. We have it here in Canada. There are other places in the world. And so I'd like to just say a little bit about why we are doing this work. Why single out Palestine and Israel? Are we singling out that region unduly? And so I'd just like to summarize 3 reasons why I think we have taken up this work. Number one, as Kathy has outlined, we have a longstanding involvement in Israel-Palestine, moving from relief work to development work to peace education and finally to advocacy. MCC and we as a denomination have realized that you don't just feed people, you don't just send them bottles of water. You ask why people are hungry. You ask why they don't have water. What are the roots of this injustice? What are the political and economic social barriers that keep us from realizing this dream of justice and equality? And so I think as Mennonites, we have moved along on these questions from just relief to actually trying to address systemic issues. So that's number one. The second reason why we do this is the plea of our partners. And Kathy and Suzanne talked about partners that we have in Israel-Palestine, whether it's Bethlehem Bible College or whether it's Zokrot, whether it's Palestinian organizations or Israelis. They are telling us we need to speak up. Talk to your politicians about our policies towards Israel and our support for Israel. Israel thrives because they have the backing of powerful Western countries. We need to point out the injustices, advocate for nonviolent change. And we're hearing the growing sense of powerlessness. Palestinians say they're at the end of their rope. We don't want to go down the road of violent resistance to the oppression we are experiencing. So our partners in both Israel and Palestine are encouraging the international community to speak out. And so that's the second reason why we do this. And the third reason I would say is our theology demands it. First of all, we are a people who are called to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God, Micah 6:8. We are Jubilee people who are aligned with Jesus in his mission to proclaim good news to the poor, liberty to the captives, set free those who are oppressed. That's from his inaugural sermon in Luke 4 in Nazareth. And especially as we relate to our brothers and sisters in the faith, we follow the pattern of the early church. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 12 that we are the body of Christ. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. And that applies to the local church of that day and our day. but it also applies internationally to the church, and including the early church. And I've been inspired by the New Testament, where it talks about the suffering of the church in Jerusalem, where the movement all started. And then meanwhile, the gospel went out into the Mediterranean basin, and churches were started. And then by the time the Apostle Paul came along, the early church was providing aid for the church back in Jerusalem. And so in 2 Corinthians 8, for example, there's this appeal for funds to support the church in Jerusalem. And in a way, that's what we're doing here. We are looking internationally to where the church has a need. And in this case, it may not be a physical famine, but we believe that there's a famine of justice in Israel, Palestine. And so that is one thing that drives us. Our Christian brothers and sisters have called us through the Kairos statement and other statements. They say, please support us and pray for us and work for justice on our behalf. And so that's why we do what we do. So that's just a way to kind of go on to talk about our Palestine-Israel network and the specifics of what we're doing. I'll just say a little bit about Mennonite Church Canada, the national PIN, and then Kathy and Suzanne can say more. So over the last 6 years since our resolution passed, our work came under the umbrella of International Witness. And through that, over the last 3 years, we have forged a renewed partnership with Bethlehem Bible College that envisions partnerships locally for events and political action, and sharing, exchanging educational exchanges. And we have a lecture tour planned for this fall of Bethlehem Bible College people coming over and sharing about the situation in Palestine and Israel. So we do that at the national level, and we have prayer requests that go out to our churches through the communications office. We have a web page, and we need to get that into the chat as well, that you can look at it. Mennonite Church Canada. Anyway, I think I'll turn it over to Kathy and Suzanne so they can talk a little bit about what they're doing at the regional level. And so, yeah, who wants to start? Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit about some of what happens at the regional level?
Sure. Thank you, Byron. As I mentioned earlier, Esther, who is there with Byron, is part of our MCEC PIN group, Palestine Israel Network. And I think both of us have been with this group since the beginning. I'd like to just mention a couple of things, and then maybe Esther would like to add something. But I'd like to say that we have done a lot of educational work locally. We've used the podcast made by Ken, who is part of us, and he works with MCC. He's done 2 podcasts on Israel Palestine, and we organized some discussion around those podcasts. And that was a very successful way to help people to understand the issues better. Also, we have participated along with Canadian Friends of Sabeel in highlighting Gaza and what's going on there. It's not horrible, it's a horrific situation for people in Gaza. There are people who are in their upper teens, have never left Gaza, have never been to Jerusalem, either to church or to the mosque in Jerusalem, because Gaza has been cut off from the rest of the Israel and the West Bank. So one of the things that we did, it was before COVID, of course, a small delegation from our group went to Ottawa, and we met with various groups in Ottawa. There's a a group of MPs who are called the just a minute now, I don't want to get that wrong. The Palestine Canadian Parliamentary Group. Now I don't have it exactly.
Friendship group.
Friendship group. Thank you, Byron. We went there a week before. 20 of them went to Palestine, organized by the Palestinian Authority. They organized an excellent tour of the West Bank for them. They were not allowed to go to Israel, or they didn't go. I'm not sure, there were some complications there, but anyway, they got to see a lot of the things that that Shadia has talked about, and that Suzanne and Byron have also talked about. We met with them just to brief them about, you know, the situation. Elizabeth May was part of that delegation, and it was mostly liberals and NDP people. I think there was one person from the Progressive Conservative group, but they went there, came back, and they had several recommendations, which some of us tried to, you know, to work with. One of the recommendations that they made was that Canada should appoint an envoy to go to Palestine and check on children. There are hundreds of children every year that get arrested under the age of 16 and as low as 12 years old by the Israeli military, put into prison. And I won't go into details of that because we don't have time, but that was one of the recommendations of the members of parliament who went. And we have worked on that. We have participated with other groups in trying to move that forward. Another recommendation that they had was that Canada, or they agreed with the recommendation of the Palestinians for boycott, divestment, sanctions. Now, what that really means is that in 2005, about 170 Palestinian organizations decided to sign an agreement that they said, we have tried everything. We have tried violence. We have tried, you know, non-violence of various kinds. We've tried different tactics. And we are now asking the world to join us in boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And we can have more discussion about that. But Palestinians see it as kind of their last resort for requesting nonviolent action to help both publicize their case and to help to bring the occupation to an end. So I don't know, Esther, would you like to add something? We've done several things. Maybe you'd like to highlight something.
Well, all I can say is that I have been there with what was formerly known as Christian peacemaker teams, and now we call ourselves community peacemaker teams, because it more adequately reflects who we are in terms of our global organization, our multicultural approach, our multi-faith approach, and our inclusion of all people. And I have been worked in Palestine on 11 different occasions, the longest being for 3 months. And I have witnessed every single thing that has already been mentioned. And my heart just bleeds every time I go. And it just hardens my resolve to continue to work for justice and for an end to the brutal occupation, because I see the toll, the emotional toll and the physical toll that it takes on the Palestinians. I've learned to love them as my brothers and sisters. It hurts me when I see the children being taken away by a group of 6 soldiers, and I know what's in store for these children. I've witnessed home demolitions. I've walked out on the patio and heard 8 gunshots, and a 17-year-old youth lies dead at the checkpoint. And that can't help but just really, really embed itself deep in my heart. And as I said, it hardens my resolve to continue to work for peace and justice. Justice first and foremost, but peace also in the Middle East. And I have been so inspired by the peace activists in Palestine. And that's one of our goals, is to stand in solidarity with them and support their nonviolent resistance to this brutal occupation. And I have spoken in many venues here in Canada, because that is the one thing the Palestinians tell us when I ask, what can we do that would be supportive? And they all say, go home and tell our story. And I talk to my MP as well. I have a personal relationship with my member of parliament, and I tell her what I have heard, what I have seen, what I have witnessed. And my MP is very diligently communicating that kind of information to the federal level of our government.
Thanks, Esther. Suzanne, do you want to add a little bit of what you all are doing here in Alberta locally?
Yeah, so in Alberta, we have a small group that meets monthly to support the letter writing efforts that PIN Canada has started up. I think it comes out of Winnipeg, but we all do our part. My MP is Heather Mcpherson. She's the critic, the foreign affairs critic for the government of Canada, and so we've met with her, and we're trying to get some things going through that. My husband and I have been sharing our stories. It's mostly his stories. I mean, he experienced things firsthand. He has a new understanding of solidarity, which includes a deep love for the people who are struggling because of his 3 months there. So we've developed we're going to be presenting to Quakers. That's coming up, and he's working on his Jewish community, and we've presented in the community that included the Mennonite churches. I think another thing that we try to do is I try to share some of this during joys. We have a time of joys and concerns in our church. So keep putting things in our bulletins, using Sabeel and the Bethlehem Bible College as partners who help inform what we should be praying for and how we should be praying, is another thing that I would highlight that we do.
So I think you all have gotten a bit of a snapshot into what our PIN does, both at the area church level and at the national level. I'll just say, just to sum up, there's political advocacy with our MPs. And I want to mention that we have a group in British Columbia as well that's doing some of this. They've had vigils and they've had educational events in their churches and so forth. We have speaker bureaus. So a number of us are getting into our churches, and I'd like to wrap this up. You may have other questions, but we do have a website, and let's try to get that into the chat. We have a webpage at Mennonite Church Canada, which updates you on what we're doing there. And there's an opportunity also to sign up for a monthly newsletter. And I encourage you all to sign up for that. If you could put your name and email address into the chat, if you would like to get that, we can make sure you get added to the list. You can also sign up at our webpage at Mennonite Church Canada. I don't know, Suzanne, can you get that link into the chat while we open it up for some discussion? I hope we've given you a little bit to chew on here in terms of why we do what we do and what we do in our little pockets of activism across the way. And I'd also like to just again acknowledge the role of community peacemaker teams, because we do feed off each other in terms of awareness of what's going on. And I also want to acknowledge Mennonite Central Committee that a few years ago had a wonderful campaign called Cry for Home. And if you go to their website, you will find a lot of great resources there as well in terms of peace and justice in Palestine and Israel. So I think at this point we'll open it up for questions. Perhaps we left some gaps there that, and you may have some questions as to what we've been doing for the last 6 years. We intend to keep going. This issue is not going to go away anytime soon, and there's much to do. We ask your support, and if this has grabbed your attention, you're very warmly invited to get involved in advocacy, and we'd love to help you find some channels to do that. So I think I'll stop talking and let's open it up. If you have a question, I think by the way, we'd like to have some faces, and if you are able to turn on your video and willing, it would be nice to have faces for this part of the meeting. So just feel free to do that so we can see who's here, and maybe put the view onto the group, the gallery view, so that you can see faces. If you have a question, maybe just raise your hand in the reactions part of your menu at the bottom there. We're kind of assuming people know how to use Zoom by now, but any reactions to what you've heard, questions, especially for Shadia? You might want to hear a little bit more of her experience and what she's doing here. While we wait for some raised hands, or if we don't see you, just break in, unmute yourself. For those of you who are here in Edmonton for the conference, we are meeting for supper, meeting at 5 o'clock Edmonton time in the reception area there. We'll meet, and we're going to go for a Middle Eastern meal. If you're free and would like to come, feel free to join us. I could keep on talking about what we do, or Suzanne or Kathy, if you have things to add, feel free, or Esther or Shadia.
Byron, I would just like to add something quick. A friend of mine actually, when I moved back to Canada after being away for 35 years, said to me, Kathy, why are you still working on this issue? It's not sexy anymore. Well, there's other issues that are way more, and I was so saddened by that, Here are Palestinians who lived under Israeli military occupation since '67. And what is happening is that it's not a conflict. There's no conflict there. It's an occupation. And people are trying to resist. Most people non-violently, they're trying to resist this occupation. And it's cumulative. And I don't know, maybe Shadia, you would like to add something to this, but I lived there for 17 years, and I found that, Palestine, like one Israeli politician said, in fact, it was Ehud Barak, if I was a Palestinian, I'd be blowing them up. I would be blowing up the Israelis. So I think Israelis recognize how the pressure cooker and what it means to live under occupation. At least some do, some Israelis do, but it's just so sad that it just keeps on keeping on. Would you like to add something about that?
Yeah, I would like to add something to that, because one of the things that I heard, especially in the context of the South Hebron Hills, with all the partners that were working with this group that was in solidarity, and I heard it in Bethlehem too, even kind of with random local people who said, we have nothing against the Jews. No. We are ready to be good neighbors. It's the Israeli occupation, it's the government, it's the military, that's the problem. And you could sense that. You could sense that they really had in their mind the difference. And my experience in the Galilee was, the Galilee is an area where it's 50% Jews, 50% Palestinian, Arab Israeli citizens. And I'm sure there's some struggles, because it's a Jewish state, but it's pretty well an area where people are left to resolve their conflicts together. The military doesn't come in, and they are resolved. Their conflicts are resolved. So they're a model of how things, how there can be some coexistence. I think we can do better than that as humans, but let's start with that anyway. And that is existing there already. So really, everybody agrees the occupation needs to stop. That's the problem. What goes after that is where there seems to be some difference of opinion about how. And so, yeah. But I just want to say, the Palestinians we met all understand that their problem is not with Jewish people. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, as a citizen, and when I moved to Jerusalem, and that's where I studied there at Hebrew University, then I started engaging more and more actually with Palestinians from the West Bank. And for me, it was also like an educational experience, because coming from the Galilee, I mean, even I always joke, like, even in the Bible, the Galilee is this periphery where it's all like, miracles are happening in the Galilee, not much politics, right? And in some ways it's similar even today. But it is shocking me when you see how Palestinians in the West Bank are treated by Israeli soldiers, people who understand their language, right? So I learned Hebrew, I speak Hebrew, I know Israeli culture, and I think even just the switch since Oslo, kind of trying to figure out, like, what is happening? Where is Israel taking us? Like, what are all these policies, all this behavior, like, what is the end goal? And I think, I mean, I as a human being, I think, and a Palestinian, you're always struggling to understand, like, where is this behavior leading? Why are Palestinians being dehumanized? I mean, Israel's going through the 5th elections in a few months. Palestinians' peace is not on the agenda for the last 2-3 rounds of elections. I mean, how can you be so, how can you put it on the sideline and say, we're not going to talk about it? Although your taxes are high, Israelis go to the army, they sacrifice at least, whatever, 19 months or 3 years of their lives, right? And they spend their whole adulthood getting over that trauma of the army service. It's not like Israelis aren't paying the price for the occupation, but it just seems for now, the price seems worth it, and it scares me to think what needs to happen for Israelis to realize that peace is the only option here, and really how many Palestinians are going to have to pay the price for that. It's not really just an issue of, and that's a scary mindset. And I mean, just to give you an example, when I live in Nazareth, I have Israeli passport, I can travel, like, in some ways, I don't have as many restrictions as Palestinians in Gaza or the West Bank. But just moving to Vancouver the past 2 years, just the fact that you can wake up and expect your day to go as normal as possible, it's such a privilege. Just to kind of, if someone lived in Jerusalem, I had to drive to Augusta Victoria from the old city, you never knew what your day was going to be like. Crossing checkpoints to go to work, checking up on, doing this and that. I mean, all of these are part of that boiling pot that you're constantly under pressure. You don't know what's happening. You have to wait. You have to hassle I was shocked that when I, applied for the MSP and SIN number, all of stuff here, it took 2 weeks maximum. Everything was so quick, fast. You get it, right? Like, if you're in the system, it's not an issue. Actually, you can call up and ask, and right, it's so friendly. And that's not the case where I come from. It's a struggle. There's this fear of authority because they're not working for you, they're working against you. It's these little things that pile up along with the violence that happens, like in for my family, last May events was quite I think it shook a lot of our conception that we live in Israel. We're living in this democracy, and I think whatever happened last May kind of blew that bubble, because you weren't treated as an equal citizen. You were treated in a similar way that Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, are treated. And I mean, for me, it's kind of this grief. You're grieving because you realize you're not being treated equally because you have the same papers that say you're Israeli, but you're treated because you're born as a Palestinian, and that's not something that you can do anything about it. We're born who we are, right? But that already puts you at a disadvantage. And I think, I don't know, for me to deal with that, to grapple with that, it's very hard. It's very hard. And I think, again, like peacemaking and standing out, speaking up, it's just part of our DNA. That's all. That's what we have, because God created us equal. God created us loved and worthy of to be loved. And this is our message. And this is kind of the outlet that we have to say what's happening is not right. You know, in different means.
Nadia, thanks so much for sharing. I'm just looking at the clock here. We have about 3 minutes, and we haven't heard any questions yet, either in the chat. Either we're saying everything that needs to be said, or whatever.
But Howard Weidemann shared that he was there in 2018. Do you want to weigh in? Like, I'm wondering if people are having trouble unmuting or something.
Let's see, I don't see him on anymore. I think maybe they
No,
left.
he's there.
No, Howard is there, but he's not unmuting. So maybe I could just say, Yella is one of the programs that the Mennonite Church is involved in that brings people to Israel Palestine. Howard, if you unmute and want to break in, feel free. But I think what you've done is underlined the importance of going there. Palestinians tell us often, come and see. Oh, there you are, Howard. Okay, we got about 1 minute if you want to share a little bit about your experience there. You're on, Howard. Okay.
Go ahead, Howard.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we were in Yella, and trip of a lifetime. Yeah, geography and the Palestinian story, and supposed to go back home and tell everybody about the Palestinian stories. So that's and the BDS. Yeah, thanks, Kathy. That's the best way to do it, is boycott, divest, and sanction. And the member of parliament. We don't have a favorable NDP like you do in Edmonton, but anyway, I did talk to a Liberal. He's not running again, so he's not a MP right now.
Okay, thanks,
yeah,
Howard.
I like the comment about occupation.
Yeah. I'm just afraid that we might be cut off soon, but I did want to mention that if you can go to our website, which is listed in the chat, you'll find out more about us. You can find our newsletter there, and past issues. You can look up those, get a sense of what we're doing. I'll also mention, Kathy, thanks for the reminder, that all three of us, all four of us, and also John Nafziger and Joanna Hiebert, Bergen in Winnipeg, we speak in churches. We're willing to come and speak in your churches. Try to learn more and more about Israel-Palestine. It is one of those situations, and we're inspired by situations like South Africa and the civil rights movement in the States. People said that was those were hopeless situations as well, and yet people persisted. They boycotted, they protested, they educated, and eventually the walls came tumbling down. And so we keep doing this because we feel that the arc of justice, as Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice is long, but the arc of history is long, but it leads toward justice. And if we believe in the kingdom of God and God's reign, this is something that we can hope and pray for and work for. And so we just encourage you in your churches to take this on and to remember the people and the churches of Palestine in their struggles.